Hello, I'm Garry Freeman. I'm presenting the video today along with Great Minds Together, and I'm going to talk about supporting special educational needs and disability both in school and at home or outside school generally. Um, Hopefully to support school professionals, parents, carers, young people themselves in terms of understanding needs, and any professionals who might be working with a child or a young person. So the focus for me is on autism and ADHD today. Please give me a moment and I'll start sharing my screen. Here we go. So that's just some details about me, first of all, just to give you an idea of my background. A very strong background in special needs and particularly autism. So first of all, I'm going to look at autism. We can refer to that as ASC or ASD, Autistic Spectrum Condition or Autistic Spectrum Disability. Or we can say that someone is autistic. Now, I've included Asperger's and PDAS, Pathological Demand Avoidance Syndrome. There is some discussion around whether that is part of the autistic spectrum. My view is that it is. But in all honesty, this is about understanding the needs that we see and how we can support that. So I suppose the discussion and the argument about whether it is or not is for this purpose irrelevant because it's about understanding need and trying to work out how we can best support. So we're going to look at traits, triggers, and tactics. Now, neurotypical, neurodiverse. If we talk about autism, we are talking about people who are neurodiverse. What I mean by that is that their brain looks at the world in a slightly different way, interprets the world in a different way, processes the world and everything in it in a completely different way. Now, we have to bear that in mind if we're going to understand and support. And therefore, what we've got to look at and try and understand is what we call the triad of impairments, which those three are social and emotional interaction, imagination and flexibility of thought, and social communication and language. All three are impaired in an autistic person. They are impaired to different degrees. So every autistic person is completely different. It reminds me of the old saying, the thing that I've heard in school a lot. If you've met and worked with one autistic person, then you've met and worked with one autistic person. And it's as simple as that. We are all different, and that includes young people, children, young adults, adults on the autistic spectrum. So please bear that in mind. But the impairments tend to revolve around those three areas. Another way of thinking about this is we use the phrase autistic spectrum. What do we mean by that? We tend to interpret normally a spectrum as being a linear process. We think of it in a linear way, which is what's on the left-hand side of this diagram. Actually, it's better if you think about it in a circular way. So it's a circular diagram. Think about the impairments and the difficulties that an autistic person can have coming into one or more of those areas in the circle that you can see on the right-hand side. So some areas in someone who is neurodiverse will present difficulties. Other areas won't. And that's what we need to understand. Instead of simply thinking of an autistic person as having problems in all areas, it's unlikely that they will. They may do, but the odds are that some of those areas, they will be no different to anyone else in that part of their brain. So it's worth thinking about how do we consider the autistic spectrum. If we are neurotypical, in other words, not autistic, those are four areas that I've sort of tried to highlight the difference. I've talked about the triad of impairments. These are four areas where neurotypical people don't experience those kind of problems. So whether it's social communication skills, social situations, friendships and relationships, or being comfortable, being able to participate in loud, crowded environments, they're all quite different for someone who is neurotypical. So what are the traits of an autistic person? Now, it's interesting that I put the word possible at the top. This isn't a tick list. It's not a shopping list. These are possible traits, and they're traits that we can bear in mind when we try and understand, support, and work with someone who is autistic. So, obsessions, intense interests, that can come out and manifest itself in different ways. Um, but it's usually very, very noticeable. Repetitive, ritualistic behavior, which means that they can't always engage with aspects of their day, whether it's a school day, a day with their family at home, a day at work. Let's remember the working environment for autistic young people and adults. Inappropriate eye contact. They may struggle to maintain eye contact. They may really find it difficult to look at someone who is talking to them or talking with them. So please, I'll cover this in a few moments, but it's not advisable to say to someone who is autistic, look at me when I'm talking to you. That is not a useful thing in order to support someone. They can have difficulties with expressive and receptive communication. Little awareness of social niceties. So what you may find is that they speak at people rather than with them, or rather than in a conversation with them. They can take noticeably longer to process information, and that of course slows down the learning process. So we have to bear in mind that this can apply at school and at home, that we may think that an autistic person hasn't listened, hasn't understood, doesn't get it, but actually they do. It just takes them slightly longer to process that. It's about creating that space and that time. They can have difficulties sequencing and prioritizing things. They can have rigid expectations of others, such as other people should stick to rules. And I found that's particularly noticeable in the current pandemic situation, for example, where autistic young people that I've worked with can be very frustrated. It can cause them a great deal of stress if they see people clearly not sticking to rules, regulations, guidance that they can interpret as rules. It can cause a lot of anxiety. They can be introspective, very diffident, very quiet, appearing very withdrawn and not wanting to engage with anyone. They can find it difficult, following on from that one, to relate to others. So a difficulty in making and sustaining friendships. They can find it difficult to do things which require some imagination. So, for example, tasks around empathy, trying to understand or put themselves in other people's shoes or situations, or understand humour. I need to say something at that point, that there is a view around that autistic people don't have a sense of humour. They absolutely do. And the key point for me is trying to get to know someone so that you can understand their point of view and understand their humour. And that's the key thing. It's building that relationship. It's getting to know that person so that you can understand their sense of humour, rather than dismissing it and saying they don't have one, they're autistic. They do. A dislike of changes to routine and resistant to change. That's very definitely there. High or low sensitivity to different sensory stimuli. So they can be hypersensitive or hyposensitive. And again, like with the sense of humour, you'll only get to work that one out once you get to understand and work with and try and build some kind of relationship with that child or young person. Stimming can be a trait. That is often seen as flapping hands, fiddling with objects. Stimming is short for self-stimulation, so it can be anything. It can be anything. But if you see the kind of behaviour which is repeated, it's repetitive, it becomes almost obsessive that they have to do it in a particular situation, then it is stimming. And it may be something that they do if they become stressed or anxious in a situation. So it relates to several of the points I've mentioned already. They can show aggression to other children due to their underlying anxieties. And actually, they can show aggression to adults. Um, but again, that's caused by anxieties relating to the points that I've just talked about. They can be self-injurious. A lack of awareness of danger is a common thing. So a sense of danger out in the street, crossing a road, for example. And they appear not to be able to use their intelligence academically. They do, they can just appear not to, because their mind can be taking a while to process something. They can be thinking about something else. They could be stressed by something that happened a little while previously. So it's an appearance. What can trigger a situation for them where we might need to intervene earlier? So if they feel they become overwhelmed by a situation, they can experience what we might call a meltdown. And it appears that they temporarily lose behavioural control, physically, verbally, or both. A meltdown, please remember, is not a temper tantrum. It's not out of choice. It's when their senses become completely overwhelmed. They feel completely overwhelmed, and it's what happens. It's their brain triggering a reaction. Triggers can include sensory differences, sudden changes, noise, heat, cold, bright lights, the hypersensitivity that I mentioned a few moments ago to touch and sound, loud announcements or music, changes in routine. I've mentioned that as a trait previously. Unexpected happenings. So in a school, for example, if they suddenly get a cover teacher or a supply teacher. At home, if a routine has to suddenly change and a family was going to do something, but suddenly they can't. That can create a situation as a trigger. Sudden anxiety caused by a situation where they believe they've lost control. Now that refers to the previous point. A situation that changes at home, a change in routine, a change at school. They can believe they've lost control, and it can trigger again what we would think of, what neurotypical people would think of as a meltdown. Communication difficulties can be a trigger, being put on the spot. So my advice, don't put people on the spot. Give them time to think about something, process something, and create an environment where they want to contribute rather than feeling that they're being put on the spot and that they have to contribute. And that's a key difference. And I found that that works. Creating an environment where they know they're at ease and they feel at ease and they can contribute in their own way, in their own time. So, tactics to support. This is a summary because some of them I've mentioned as I've gone along. So flagging up changes wherever possible, whether that's at home, school, outside the home, if you're going out on a trip or shopping, whatever you're doing, but flag up the changes. Modify verbal communication, simplify it, avoid sarcasm, facetiousness, work out their sense of humour before you try using humour with them. Otherwise, you might think they haven't got a sense of humour. So work out their sense of humour. Model the appropriate social skills that you want. So in terms of relationships and communications and behaviour, model it and show them. Allow them time to calm down if you see them becoming agitated. I suppose what most schools would call a timeout, but you don't have to call it that. Just bear in mind that they need time to process something and give them that time to calm down. Try wherever possible to clarify and use tangible, visible rules, procedures, and routines. Tangible, visible, and simple. And that's the key. Keep it simple. Give someone choices that allow them control. I did make a point a few moments ago about you can see a meltdown develop if an autistic person thinks that or believes that they have lost control. So allow a situation, create a situation where you give choices so they feel they've got control. Structure is key, whether that's lessons, daily life in a school, routines, tasks, activities, activities with the family at home. It's structures. So autistic people can struggle tremendously with unstructured times in school, out of school. And be aware of sensory changes. Do what you can to minimize them. It isn't always possible, but I think the key is to do what we can to minimize those sensory changes. Give them space, give them time to respond, find other ways to, if you're a teacher or a professional in school, to work with other members of the class or a group, and then maybe come back to that young person. So I talk about pose, pause, and pounce is a good approach to use. You can just, it's a way of asking a question or putting a thought into someone's head and then going off and communicating with or asking someone else, and then coming back to the original person. It gives them time, it gives them space. And understand, above all, that nothing is meant personally. It never is. It can often appear as if it is, but it genuinely is not. And you will find that if you give an autistic young person or child or adult time to calm down, and then if they want to talk about a situation that developed, let them and support them, and you will soon realize that nothing is meant personally. Moving on to ADHD. Now, ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, is a neurodevelopmental disorder, and it's also a spectrum condition. So we're going to have the same approach there. What are the traits? What are the triggers? What are the tactics? What can we do to understand and support? Because again, that's the key. It is a condition which is part of the autistic spectrum, and again, there is some discussion around that. I don't want to get into that now. For me, again, it's about understanding and support. And it can result from an imbalance of chemical messengers or neurotransmitters in the brain. Again, it's about someone whose brain looks at the world slightly differently, interprets it differently, processes it differently, therefore they react differently. And it's about understanding that. Three key areas of someone with ADHD: impulsivity, inattention, and hyperactivity. Now, I've tried to boil it down to the key points of each one there. And I've tried to sort of build a very clear list of points. Again, they are not a shopping list or a tick list in any way at all. So I'm not for 1 second suggesting that we look at someone's behavior or we observe them and we start ticking boxes. They're doing this, therefore they must be ADHD. It's not about that. It's about, if we see over a period of time a number of these different issues, then my suggestion is that we start to look at the tactics to support someone. A diagnosis, as with autism, doesn't really matter. A diagnosis is useful at certain points of a child or young person's life. It can help them to open doors. It can help to get family support. That's absolutely great. But in terms of generally supporting them day to day in school, at home, that diagnosis is not crucial. You don't have to have a diagnosis to be on a special needs register in school. You don't have to have a diagnosis to be assessed for an EHCP, an education, health and care plan, and be awarded one. It's not necessary. So for me, it's about understanding, supporting. So the examples I've given you there, I'm going to sort of develop all of those as we go through this. You will notice there are a number of areas there which I've previously talked about in terms of autism, which is why more and more often professionals are looking at ADHD in terms of it being on the autistic spectrum. There's a great deal of commonality. My approach to all of this is, whatever traits you begin to see and whatever triggers you begin to see, then think about the different tactics. Whether you take them from the list that I provided with autism or from the ones that I'm going to talk about with ADHD, it doesn't matter. It's about trying to find the best means of understanding and support for someone. So a different way of thinking about it is, which is the key of all of those needs and traits that I've just talked about, all of those areas of difficulty? Well, I'm not sure there is one. This isn't about labeling someone in terms of, oh, they've got no concentration, oh, they can't remember anything. And I hear things like that in the past. I've heard them in the past in schools. It is about understanding. So, traits of someone with ADHD: difficulty to make eye contact, fidgeting all the time, and an apparent inability to stop, even though you might specifically ask them to do so. I think if you talk to a lot of teachers who work with children and young people with ADHD, that would be the one that they often highlight. Avoiding work, looking for sanction as a way out of trying to get work done because they believe they will get it wrong. And that's the key thing about how we can support them that I'll come to in a few moments. If someone believes they will get their work wrong no matter what, then receiving a sanction for poor behaviour is the easy way out. It's the lesser of two evils. Inappropriate behaviour can be a trait. No understanding of social cues. Again, let's try and understand that, and understand also that that is not meant personally. So that behaviour or lack of understanding of social cues and niceties is not directed personally at you if you're the person receiving it. They could have a disregard for consequences, in other words, a lack of executive functions which make that objective decision that neurotypical people usually find it quite straightforward to do. So please bear that in mind. Daydreaming, their attention wanders. They're looking out the window at school. They're just not listening to people, so it appears. They can pay attention to too many things at once rather than focus. So again, it's not very helpful sometimes if you say to an ADHD person, look at me, I want you listening, I need to see that you're listening. First of all, you can't see that someone is listening. That's impossible. But you can't tell if they're focusing or not. They might pay attention to a whole number of other things in that room, but they struggle to actually focus on just the one thing. They will still listen to you, they will still take it in, but they're not really focusing on as much as you might like on what you're trying to talk to them about. Negative self-esteem and a sense of isolation from praise and rewards is a common trait. Being the class clown. This fits in with what I mentioned a moment or two ago about taking a sanction for perceived poor behaviour. Because if they are the class clown, then it feeds the need for relationship and belonging. And if they get that sanction, then it also gets them out of the work that they've got to do in the lesson. So the task, the activity, and it doubly feeds that need for attention. Impulsivity is a very common trait. And again, those professionals who work with young people in school will particularly highlight that one. Let's just go back to the last one, which I nearly missed. Rule breaking. So poor social observation skills, poor understanding of boundaries. And at the risk of repeating myself, that fits in again with the taking a sanction for perceived pure behaviour and being the class clown. So it's a very poor understanding, because their executive functions can be lacking, of where the boundaries are, where the niceties are, what the importance of consequences are, and the play and an appropriate place of consequences in their life. They don't have that. They don't have that sense. So, triggers: a lack of structure, rules, and procedure. Stress caused by this partial or complete vacuum of a lack of structure. And it's the stress and the worry and the anxiety caused by that. Excessive stimuli or overstimulation in a situation, that can cause a massive trigger for an ADHD person. Lack of sleep. If you talk with, and if you're a parent or carer, you'll probably experience this, but if you're a school professional, you can talk to parents and carers, talk to the young person themselves, and they will almost certainly tell you that sleep is a major problem for them. And of course, that can trigger other reactions in terms of behavior, in terms of attitude to other people. Being told and expected to sit still and keep still is very, very difficult. And I think, again, it depends how that's done, but it can be. On being in a situation where they might need to articulate feelings or emotions, it's like the one I talked about a few moments ago of being put on the spot. It can be a trigger for a reaction in terms of behavior. Equally, unmanaged stress. So if they have stress from any situation that I've talked about, but they feel that it's not been managed, they feel it's not supported, and they're not able to manage it themselves. I'm not a food expert, a nutrition expert, but there is a great deal of research out there with evidence that nutrients, like the ones I've listed there for you, can diminish the signs of ADHD. Whereas foods full of sugar and fat can have the opposite effect. And particularly, as a 2007 study showed that monosodium glutamate, MSG, red yellow dyes, and sodium benzoate tended to aggravate the symptoms of ADHD. If I've talked, as I have many times in the last 10, 15 years, with professionals who support young people with ADHD, they have always considered diet as a key factor in how to put that support in place. And they've worked with that young person and with the family in terms of diet. So, tactics. Right. Again, a summary. I've referred to them as I've gone along. Starts really with the number one, and it has to be the number one, and that is patience. Showing patience. Avoid overstimulation or excessive stimuli. Again, giving that person time. Providing structure, especially around starting, completing, transitioning to different tasks. Interesting there, that can apply in the family situation, the home situation, the work situation, and I'm not just talking about school. So it's any situation. Starting structures and transitions to new or different things. Clarity and a lack of ambiguity. Keep it simple, keep it very clear so it can't be misunderstood. Predictability, that fits with the previous one. Keep it clear, unambiguous, very predictable. If you can have the structures that are predictable for someone with ADHD, someone with autism, you've actually achieved a great deal. And I think you will see the benefits. They will feel the benefits, and therefore you will see it. Shorter work periods. That doesn't mean that you expect less of them. It can mean that you expect the same of them in a slightly different way. So you can have breaks in lessons, breaks at work. And I have heard of employers who recognize and accept that someone is autistic or they've got ADHD, and therefore they will build in short breaks for that person simply because they know that if they do that, they will get the best out of that person as an employee. So it's about support, understanding in a particular situation. Positive reinforcement. This can vary enormously according to the individual. Sometimes it can be very, very obvious. Other times it might need to be discreet. But the point is positive reinforcement. However we do it, it needs to be there. A more interesting, accessible curriculum. I'm particularly thinking of when I've taught nurture curriculum, and I devised one from scratch, and I've taught that and led it in 3 high schools since 2006, to make that curriculum for so many lessons a week to an identified group of students, to make it more interesting, to make it accessible, so they can access it, so they can engage with it, so they can achieve over a period of time. Interesting thing there is that I have had feedback from their other subject teachers and from parents about life outside school, that that's had a knock-on effect and a beneficial effect beyond the nurture lessons. So when I taught nurture, it was for up to about 10 lessons out of 25 a week. But the feedback I got was literally incredible sometimes, of given a period of time, given 3 months, 4 months, what changes did we start to see? And a more interesting, accessible curriculum, one that can engage with, that gave them reinforcement, that had structure, it was clear, it was predictable. That definitely worked. Have positive expectations and consistent use of positive language. I always say, don't lower your expectations because someone has special needs, autistic, ADHD, or any special need. Have those positive expectations. Keep those expectations sky high. It's very important. But look and think about, how can we put a structure in place to support that young person? Simple, clear instructions delivered calmly, firmly, fairly, consistently. So verbal presentation and body language are absolutely key. Bear that in mind. Obviously, that applies to parents, carers, and anyone working with a child or young person, and not just at school. Have brevity and clarity around boundaries. So avoid long narratives and discussions. Break things up. You can break them up with visuals. You can break them up with movement breaks. And that can be very simple, according to what the subject is, according to the age of the children or young people. But avoid long narratives and discussions. Scaffold work and tasks into component parts and give it some pace. You can have pace, you can have scaffolding and pace, you can have work breaks in work, you can have movement breaks as well as pace. It's about planning and thinking about how we do this. And sometimes it's a case of not just thinking outside the boxes, it's about tearing up the boxes completely and starting afresh. And clearly, there's that very well known quote from Einstein. It may not be from Einstein, but allegedly, that it's absolute lunacy, it's madness to do the same thing over and over again and expect a different outcome. If something works, build on it. If it doesn't, get rid of it. And that's always been my view, particularly when I've been working with autistic people and anybody with ADHD. So think about not only what we do, but how we do it. Stop, think, do, when and then, first and next are very useful approaches in terms of breaking things down, having structure to what we're talking about. Can work with a family at home. So when you've done this, then we're going to do this. First, we're going to do this, next, and then. So you give a structure, immediately you're giving a structure, you're breaking it down. So you are maintaining that expectation, but you're actually breaking it down so that it causes less anxiety and less worry for somebody, less stress. So it's again about understanding and thinking about not only what we do, but the key word, how we do it. Have prepared sheets and stickers where you can, so that someone with ADHD doesn't feel that, for example, they've got to keep copying off the board, because that can create anxiety or stress. They might not be able to keep up. It's a very definite skill to being able to look at a board, write something down, look at the board again, write that, and keep doing that for a sustained period of time. That's a skill. It's a skill that not an awful lot of people have. So think about pre-prepared things and how that can help. Last word really about practice strategies for students with ADHD. 5 key points. Keep the pace, have the movement breaks, because movement actually helps ADHD brains concentrate better. And that can vary. I've seen some great movement breaks in geography lessons, in modern language lessons. Um, it's just a case of thinking, well, what can I do? What can I do in this situation? Novelty. Novelty and newness equals interest. If you get someone's interest, they're going to be engaged. If you get them engaged, they can access it, they will access it, they will learn, they will attain. And over a period of time, they will achieve. So it's a process, isn't it? It's not a one-off thing, it's a process. Give a focal point to any activity or lesson. And again, family activities, family pastimes, give it a focal point. Physical items, um, stickers, anything like that, something which is visual and physical. And the final point, last but by no means least, certainly, is structure. So structure your practice and help them to do it. Don't expect them to structure it themselves. So I'm saying, please don't say to a class, if you're working with a group, okay, I want you to do this, you get on with it. Structure it. Put a structure in, put a pace in there, and make it very clear what you expect. But also make it clear that it's not an absolute. It's not an absolute. So you can set a class or a group of people a number of things to do. Doesn't mean they have to do it all, but you can expect them to. The two are different. It's about thinking about the words we use and how we communicate that with someone with ADHD. So, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Those are my details in terms of my consultancy, my email, if anybody would like to get in touch to follow anything up. I am on Twitter as @GFreeman2012. So thank you again for listening to all of this. And I'm just going to unshare my screen. So bear with me, please. There we go. Hello. So as I've said, I do hope you found that useful today. And please do get back to me. That's why the Twitter feed, that's why the Twitter handle is there. That's why the email is there. So I do wish you very well and all the best if you are working with anyone who is autistic or they have ADHD. Think about the key points I've kept repeating as I've gone along. It's about understanding. It's about making that effort to look at it from a slightly different point of view. It's about thinking, not only what do I need to do, but how do I need to do this so it supports someone. Okay, thank you again, and I wish you all well. Thank you. Bye-bye.